Welcome to everyone joining us for today's talk. I'm Jan Dalley, Arts Editor at the Financial Times, and the latest edition of Art Basel's online viewing room, called OVR Portals, opens to the public this Thursday. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by one of its curators, Larry Ossei-Mensah, and one of the exhibiting artists, Gisela McDaniel. Before I move to the introductions, as always, please do add any questions or comments, either in the box below if watching on artbasel.com, or in the comments if on Facebook Live. I'll get your questions. I won't be able to take them immediately, but I will take a selection of them at the end of our time today in our discussion. So, to very briefly introduce today's panel, Gisela McDaniel joins us from Detroit, where she's lived and worked for the last 4 years. And as we'll see, her portraits are very special. They interweave oil painting with audio recordings and objects significant to her subjects, giving a voice to those healing from trauma or violence. So her subjects are very much heard as well as seen. She gives them a voice as well as a representation. Gisela is showing with Pilar Correa's gallery for OVR Portals. But first, I'm going to turn to Larry. Larry, alongside Magali Ariola and Christina Lee, Larry is one of the 3 curators of OVR Portals. This is something of a departure for Art Basel, who have invited this amazing international trio of talent, curatorial talent, to curate the online viewing rooms for Portals. Larry was born in Harlem and raised in the Bronx. He's a curator and cultural critic, independent curator, who serves as curator at large at the Academy of Music, and is co-founder of Art Noir, a global collective which has a mission to catalyze equity across the arts and industries. So Larry, welcome, first of all.
Hey,
Tell me first. Hi, I'm good. It's great to hear you. You're in Mexico. Is it
yes,
great
I am
there?
in Mexico. Rainy, but I'm enjoying myself.
Yourself. That's very good. Yeah. Well, yeah. So we're speaking. I'm speaking from London. You're in Mexico, and Gisela is joining us from Detroit. So we
Yes.
are. Yeah, we're kind of across the world. So tell me, first of all, Larry, you and your fellow curators, how did you come to the idea of portals, and what does it mean for you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jean, for moderating this conversation. Thank you to Gisela, the team at Art Basel, and I also want to thank my co-curators, Magali and Christina. I think we came to Portals as a framework just through conversation, and I think kind of trying to reflect on how we each have attempted to navigate the last year, in particular, but to not just focus on the pandemic per se, because there's so many other issues that have permeated culture, that might not necessarily be at the forefront of the conversation. And so I think as curators, we were thinking about what can art teach us, right? How can we reflect on not only the challenges of the particular moment, but look back in history and see when there were other moments that were challenging and the artists responded. And for me, I like to look at Portals as a portrait, and a portrait to the zeitgeist, and the different conversations, whether it's highlighting the struggles of indigenous communities in Brazil, or if it's trying to platform more artists that are not necessarily in quote unquote creative centers, and really using the digital platform, which has become normalized in many of our daily lives, as an opportunity to kind of expand the reach for discovery, conversations, perspective. Um, and I think also I look at Portals as a proposition. And I don't think we were necessarily trying to answer questions per se. I think we were just trying to create space for dialogue, create space for enlightenment. And I think, as you alluded to just in this conversation, it's been a really wonderful collaboration because I think, living in New York, you can have this kind of myopic thinking that everything revolves in New York with regard to the art world. And to talk to, Christina, who's between Amsterdam and Hong Kong, Magali, who's in Mexico City, and really kind of get a better temperature of what's happening in South America, what's happening in Asia, Southeast Asia, and really making an effort to include those voices in a very thoughtful way, I think is what's been exciting. And so for me, in addition to just working, learn so much, and my hope that people who experience the portals OVR will learn. I think Giselle is a fantastic example. I'm an artist who I met several years ago, still senior curator at MoCAD in Detroit, offering us a unique perspective, thinking about Guam, thinking about Micronesia, thinking about these indigenous communities, and then being able to kind of create this overlap with different subjects that she's been able to interview and portrait their portrait in Detroit. So yeah, I think for us the goal is to create space for learning, discovery, enlightenment, and hopefully a bit of fun despite some of the challenges that we've had to endure the last year. But then I think thinking about the possibilities of what the future holds now that some parts of the world are getting the vaccine and we're, I won't even say moving into normalcy, but like starting a new chapter in our society.
Yeah. So you're really talking about portals as opening doors in every possible way, international doors, artistic doors, giving opportunities. And so you and your fellow curators have brought into Art Basel quite a number of galleries who are first timers and from very disparate parts of the world. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you choose them? How did you find them?
Well, so it's two layers to the process. With the first layer being us identifying galleries or artists that we had relationships with, and then there was a selection committee process, which I think was really enlightening because we had people on the selection committee from Malaysia, Europe, and I think the goal was really to utilize this platform as a space to shake things up, honestly, and bring a fresh and new perspective. Because I think, the reality is that it's not lost on us that some people have Zoom fatigue. Some people, want to experience fairs in real life. And so for us, it was thinking about how do we make this feel dynamic? How do we make it feel fresh and interesting? And how do we actually use the digital format as an opportunity to, showcase more video works, for example. And so, the goal was, as curators, how do we make this interesting for ourselves first? And I think normally when you try to satiate and feed that desire and hunger, then you usually generate the most interesting result. So obviously
Yeah.
we're thinking about a global audience, but I think we're also thinking about, and that's what was fun because I think we all have different focuses curatorially, and so to have that dialogue and bring that level of rigor to the process, I think really was enjoyable, and it was good for me, even though I do travel widely, to just make sure that I'm not thinking about this process through kind of just a U.S. lens, but really through a global lens, thinking about the humanity of the different creative voices, and really using this opportunity to bring voices to the table that might not normally be brought to the table. And I think that's the most exciting part. And my hope is that people will discover these voices and embrace them from them, support them, and that it actually now serves as a bridge. Because I think that's another thing when we're thinking about portals opening doors, bringing down barriers, but I think also serving as a bridge for communities that may not normally be in conversation with.
Well, I haven't seen it all yet, but it looks as if you've done a fabulous job. Let's move now to Gisela. So Gisela is an artist working in Detroit, but she comes from a very, very interesting background. So tell us, first of all, Gisela, a little bit about your own ethnic background and how it informs your work, because it's very important, I think, for your work.
Yes, of course. And thank you for having me today. I am mixed race. My mother was born on Guam, and my father grew up in Ohio. So I've witnessed my mother through a lot of experiences, and I've also she's an Indigenous woman who was moved because of militarization to the States, and watching her experiences through institutions in her own life, it's very much been instilled with me that I'm Chamorro through my grandparents, my Nana and Tata, and being raised by my mother. And even just hearing Larry speak and hearing the word Guam in this platform, it almost gives me chills, because growing up in the Midwest, no one ever knew what Guam was. No one ever knew where Guam was. But it's also a U.S. territory. It's one of the 17 existing colonies in the world today. And especially in this climate where everybody's talking about decolonize this, decolonize that. I think this presentation of portals is really exciting, because I oftentimes think about all of the Chamorro voices that don't necessarily reach the States, and how intertwined those politics are at the same time. So being able to create these portals where the voices can jump through and somebody can interact with a story that they would have never been able to be in person with is really exciting, all of the possibilities through that. So I'm really grateful to be here. I guess to share a little bit about my work, it all started with my own need to heal through sexual violence that I had experienced. And when I think about violence against women and femme people, it truly is a global problem. So it is exciting to talk about portals as relationships, portals as conversations, portals as something that is transformative and you move through and come out the other side a little bit changed, or there's seeds that are planted in your head. And I think that's what's exciting about art, is we get to share perspectives and we get to see people speak for themselves and have a moment where there's creativity and pleasure, and celebration, but it's a gift to be able to paint somebody. It's a gift to be able to witness and hear somebody's experience. So I feel very grateful that I'm able to share this work here, and especially when it is an online platform, there's challenges, because it's exciting in a lot of ways that it's going to reach more people, but there's challenges within that, because the way that I work with voice, I like to protect the people I'm working with. So it looks differently when it's in person than when it's online. So,
yeah. And one of the essential things, as I just said very briefly at the beginning about your portraiture, is that you don't show portraits without voice being part of it. In other words, you give your subjects a voice, you give them the right to speak back, you don't just represent them. So first of all, just so that everyone knows what we're talking about, we're going to see three, I think, of your works and a very short sound piece.
I was going all the way back to the beginning of that moment when Magellan, or that, in some ways, that violence felt, but more importantly, connected to genocide, like not just institutional violence, but a kind of genocide. It was a way of killing us. We have some of the highest rates of cancer in the world.
Super high class systems. They talk about being on the beach. They go on these lavish vacations. And if it's not these lavish vacations, they're taking missionary trips at these lavish places.
Our ocean, our islands being used as, bombing sites. I was responding to as kind of a soul wound.
Building a church in a random island. It actually comes from military practice, military bases in the Philippines.
And let's just be clear that institutions have always been part and parcel of how people have been displaced from their lands.
Systemic racism.
There's a lot of intergenerational trauma that our elders or our manamku never processed.
And the thing is, I never told anybody. Because I didn't have really a queer community.
Language, communicate. So I feel like I just didn't talk for a long time because I was just embarrassed of my accent and messing up.
And I kid you not, I got to hear my mama, I wiped my eyes. I was like,
it always just very hard. Dealing with the doctor. I was doing so much emotional labor.
And I was no longer on insurance because America.
And I think part of being a Black woman and having all these experiences, having all this trauma, having to always wade through trauma. No matter what you're doing, having to always wade through trauma and bullshit, you begin to believe that no good thing can come to you without suffering.
Well, those are stunning portraits, really extraordinary. And so how do you find and select your models?
It's really all been by word of mouth and within my communities. When I first started doing this work, I was really seeking out people who had similar experiences as me or had similar identities as me, and in exchange for a conversation and sharing stories and talking story, I would do a figure drawing of folks, and people really liked that, and it became such a bigger project where I wanted to see them as oil portraits. I wanted to see them life size. I wanted to see them big, and I wanted to see them celebrated. And at the same time, I've come to the realization that I really create the audio pieces and the sound elements for people outside of these experiences. And that's absolutely a gift that these speakers give to the public, an opportunity to step into somebody's perspective and to understand their experiences. And I really the way I edit is I try not to focus on moments of violence, because I think that's talked about so much. I think we see statistics all the time. And to see yourself within a statistic is quite frankly dehumanizing in a lot of ways. You become a number, it becomes a graph, and you click through it and you forget about it. And I think we need to humanize and really respect and treat people with dignity and reflect on how experiences of violence affect the way people move through the world, and also celebrate that they still show up for work every day and they still raise their families and they still do all the things that they have to do to be a person in this world. And so when I work on the paintings, I'm really thinking about that person and making a piece that they're going to see themselves in and be excited and feel beautiful and celebrated. But when I make the audio piece, it's almost more of a defensive factor, where it's meant to be a sound design element in the space where you cannot interact with that work without interacting with that person's voice and interacting with that person's narrative. And if you want to take in all the details of the work, I think another thing I'd like to mention that I do is people contribute broken jewelry and clothing to the painting. So a lot of the times their own personal objects are embedded in the surface. And I see especially jewelry as a way we personally adorn ourselves every day. It almost is like wearable protection, and oftentimes there's a story behind the objects we wear. So another gift that my subjects really provide me with, I mean, so much wisdom is passed down through these almost oral histories. And I've been excited about the objects in a way that thinking about them almost as personal artifacts, and then thinking about what artifacts currently look like in museums. A lot of them weren't necessarily given to the museum by the owner, and to think about an intentional artifact, an artifact that was consensual and was like, I'm contributing this because I want to be remembered with this, and that was an agreement. I'm excited about that. I think that's a really interesting moment and just thinking about how we can shift the way art is used and have it really have momentum behind it. And I mean, the reason I paint is because I realized that I was able to paint, and I had this conversation with myself where it's like, okay, what is it going to be about? Like, I have this ability to do this, but it needs to be about something important. And that kind of found me, and this process has been such a healing and wonderful experience where I've literally been gifted language from so many people to inform my own experiences, to share with other people, and to like build communities within this process has been so fruitful to me.
That sounds fantastic. Let me bring in Larry now. Larry, you've known Gisela's work for a while, as you said, and she's talked about the community building aspect of her work. Was that something that resonates strongly with you as a curator and as somebody who I know has been encouraged her and promoted her work?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about my practice and some of like the tenets that kind of inform why I do what I do, access and a sense of belonging have always been kind of paramount. And I think one thing that, in addition to community and the community that Gisela has cultivated, I think her use of language was something that struck me, right? Because like she talks about, being able to paint these gifts, right? She talks about healing. She talks about, depending on what the subject has gone through, survivors. A lot of the language is very affirmative, right? And I think, and she taught me that, because there would be times where I'd be saying, "Oh, they're like XYZ," and she's like, "No, that's not what we're doing. Like, this is about affirming the existence of these individuals, their humanity, celebrating them." And I think, I think for a curator, that's kind of one of the best gifts you can get from an artist. Is like, yes, they're talented. Yes, she makes beautiful paintings, but these moments where you can learn and grow, I think those are priceless. And I think, in addition, and I would love for Gisela to go a little bit deeper. The audio component was something that me, because I had the opportunity to show Gisela's work in an exhibition at Light Art the fall of 2019, and in construction of the exhibition, two paintings that she made in a sound piece in a room. So you come, you're drawn in by the painting, and then you're just kind of enveloped by this art. And so for me, that was just kind of just an interesting wrinkle that just kind of, for me, made what she wanted to achieve through the practice feel unique and important. And I guess I'd be curious here a little bit about how you landed on that, because I don't know if I ever specifically asked you that. But how did you land on the audio component as an essential piece to completing the image or completing the portrait?
Mm-hmm. Well, before I even started creating the paintings, I was doing these interviews just as a practice for myself, because I was really seeking language and understanding from my peers at the time. And it just came naturally as the voice kind of came for the images in a lot of the aspects. Like that was the first part of, that's the first layer of the process, is that relationship I have with the subject. So to remove that part, to remove their voice, to remove their ability to speak for themselves just didn't make any sense to me. From the very beginning, I was like, these cannot be separated. And just sticking to that and being stubborn about that has been, it feels right. I feel like if I ever did take the voice away, it would just be uncomfortable. And I feel like I would feel that it was wrong within my body. Because there's so much that relies on like these moments where we're just sitting together in space. I think it's so precious. It's such a precious thing. And I often think about these conversations as kind of the types of wisdoms that you would get from an auntie rather than anything you would ever learn in school. It's these wisdoms that keep you safe and help you move through the world and help you survive. It's nothing you would learn anywhere else. And that's why I describe the audio as truly a gift, because for somebody else completely out of these experiences who just walks into a gallery space or enters this room, for them to be able to witness these wisdoms, especially because a lot of the people I do work with are Indigenous. And I think thinking about knowledges and the types of knowledges we respect, especially in the West, I would love to see those, what we honor and what we consider to be true. I'd like to see that shift. So it's exciting because I feel like I had my own agenda in this work from the beginning. Like I wanted to heal, but I also I think about accountability a lot, and I think that's been coming up a lot in the past year, is how does accountability look? Like what does that process look like? And I don't know if anybody's really perfectly figured that out, but to me, and what I found through this almost research that I've been doing, is conversations are incredibly healing. To be able to sit down with somebody in a calm way, and even if it's somebody who harmed you, and to be like, hey, just so you know, this is how I experienced that within my body. And to be able to have that understanding and like almost be gracious with these people and give them an opportunity to learn, rather than kind of pointing a finger and being like, you were wrong for this. Like, yes, you were wrong for this, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to learn. I think that is such a gift, and I hope people take it seriously and really listen with intention, because it's incredible to be able to witness people, and especially thinking about my mother and how that show you were talking about at Oolite, I painted her in that show, and then I revisited a more recent story she had with this work. And it's just amazing what people will share with you if you ask. And I think a lot of people exist through this world, through lifetimes, through generations, carrying a lot of weight, and just like, and it's heavy, it really affects you. So, and what's really profound to me is how many times the same emotions are repeated, so many experiences, and even more profound to me, like feelings are repeated over and over and over again. And it's like, there's so much significance in the fact that we're all expressing these things. So I think it's important to pay attention to. It's important to talk to each other. It can be really healing to just like sit down and talk in your family, with strangers, like wherever you go. Like, I think conversations are portals into a new perspective, and we should move through those portals. We shouldn't value a conversation with somebody over somebody else, because I think every human life deserves to be respected and heard. And I think about oral history as well, and how in a lot of cases, if something didn't look good written down, it wasn't respected anymore. And I think we need to revisit that. I think a lot of wonderful cultures have have passed down knowledge traditionally through just voice. And we have erased and forgotten so many things because of that. So to really like reclaim that and like practice that in my daily life has helped me grow up and helped me survive. So to be able to share this work is very humbling.
And many of your titles are in the Chamorro language, aren't they? Is that
Yeah.
a written language that is current? It's a living language.
Yes, but it's absolutely at risk of dying within our lifetimes. There's a big, almost Chamorro renaissance of folks trying to relearn the language. Like, for example, my mother wasn't taught her language, and she grew up on the island because of colonization, because of Catholicism, because of militarization. My mother's generation, my grandparents were told not to teach their children the language. They weren't allowed to speak it in school. And that's violence, that's erasure, that's knowledge we will never get back.
Another form of
There's so much
real
wisdom.
silencing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really wonderful to see all these young activists, and like there's free language classes on Zoom, and there's just all these connections online as well. So, but I choose not to translate them oftentimes because I do hope that people will Google the language and pay attention to that and understand what's going on the island as well, because they're fighting for a lot. They're fighting for their land, their water. There's a movement called Putehi Latexin going on about the ongoing military build-up the north of the island. And one of the only freshwater aquifers that provides the island with 80% of their fresh water is at risk of being polluted. And I think we see this all over the world where people's just human rights are being denied. And it's really frustrating to watch that. And it's exciting as an artist to be able to talk about these and to be able to like place these, just like put those words in this room. But it's heartbreaking to watch. And there's a lot of suffering in the world. So to be able to talk about it, to have constructive conversations and imagine new futures and dream of new futures together, I think that's where we need to start to really take care of each other. I think care in the world isn't valued the way I would like to see it. I think care is care is labor. Like, we take care of our elders, we take care of our babies, and that's not easy work. So I think we should think about the way we care about each other, even the way you care about walking past a stranger on the street. Do you respect their space? Are you respectful in the way you move? I think if more people thought in that way, we'd have a more caring space to live in.
Question: if my timing is correct, you went to Guam before lockdown, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
how did that experience, I guess, change you personally and professionally? Because I know we talked about it, and I think, as a first generation Ghanaian American, I think the importance of going back to your motherland and like engaging with it. And, because I think sometimes the space can exist in an imaginary and just through stories and folklore. So I guess, how did that experience shift you personally? And then I think also creatively in terms of how you approach your practice. And I guess the nuances that I guess begin to layer in as well.
Yeah. Well, it was my first time being able to even go into the island because the tickets are very expensive. And you were actually the one who prompted me to do that trip. I remember talking to you, and you were just like, just do it. Just buy the ticket. And I'm really grateful that I did that and the timing of it, it was so important to me. I remember having, on the plane ride down, my grandparents have passed like 6 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. But I remember having a dream about my grandfather right before I landed, and it waking me up right before the plane landed. And they're just I was really close to them, and they're just such wonderful people that really taught me like what my culture looked like in a diasporic sense. Of course, like I had never been home because of really the militarization on the island. That was the only job that my grandfather could get to support his family. They had 5 children, and he joined the U.S. military, and they ended up in San Diego, and worked all kinds of jobs to create this life for like all of my cousins and me. And I'm so grateful for that. But also at the same time, like they had always instilled in me that we were Chamorro. Like I remember for Christmas, I was given a Chamorro, I Am Chamorro DVD. This like, so to be there, it was almost like you said, it was a landscape that had really lived in my imagination my whole life. Like I had always dreamed about going. I had always been attracted to certain kinds of landscapes. And for a long time, that was San Diego was the closest thing I got to that. And it was the rooms I was with my family in. It was the living room when we're all had music on and eating Chamorro food and barbecuing. And to actually be there and spend time with other aunties and close friends of my grandparents and sit in their backyard kitchen with the chickens running around, and just to again sit in space with people and talk and connect in person. I think that's something we've lost a lot over the years, just being face to face and having conversations. So it was just I was so in awe of all of the amazing activists on the island, all of the passion of how they fight for what's theirs is incredible. And I would love to see that given more attention, because there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of struggles going on. There's a lot of like similar to the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Turtle Island in the United States. Sexual assault is also a really big issue on the island. So to kind of be able to be there on the land, to be able to go into the aquifer that my ancestors went to and touch things they created, it's something that I'm gonna think about. I think about it every single day, and I think about what's going on the island every single day, and I want to see, just thinking about like our elders and like all of the knowledge we could lose because of the way that our knowledge has been respected. I think it's exciting to be connected with young people and artists and all of the things that would have been difficult for me to connect with without being there, and just to also spend time with the land, like to be on that land, to touch the water. It's something that's indescribable. It just kind of hits you in your heart, and to make sure, and like thinking about protecting that. The audio piece as well has noises from one of the aquifers in the background of it. It's mixed in, and I think that's an exciting moment that I'm kind of leaning towards, is letting the land speak as well. And I think about the ways we honor and treat women's bodies can be quite similar to the way we treat land, where you take the resources and then you don't replenish it, you don't take care of that. So to be in right relationship with everybody and everything, every living thing, and even like the water, the land, to really respect the things that give us life is important. I think I got that out of that trip too. I don't think without being there and without touching that.
That sounds really amazing. Larry, do you visit Ghana? I know that's your heritage. Are you regularly in touch with Ghana and your Ghanaian background?
Sorry, I'm muted. I was just so enveloped in what Gisela was sharing. But I visited Ghana twice during, I guess, the height of COVID. My mom, she lives part-time between there and New York. And pretty much once the pandemic kind of like exploded, my brother and I were just like, it's probably better if you stay there. Um, and for me, it's kind of a similar journey of learning about aspects of my culture and my family's history that isn't always readily spoken about. But then I think additionally engaging with artists who are on the ground, um, doing studio visits, trying to understand their perspectives and the concerns that they want to express through their work has been really enriching. And so, my goal, I normally go every Christmas, but I think if I can go multiple times a year, I think that really would be just a more personal added value per se. Sorry about the background noise.
Amazing scene in Ghana. Now I'm going to move to. We could talk all night, and I wish we could, but I've got so many questions here from our listeners, so I've got to put some of these to you, and I'm going to move to some of these. So there's a question for you, Larry. Let's keep our answers quite short because I've really got a lot of questions, so it would be fun to take as many as we can. So the first question for you, Larry, is what do you look for in an artist's work, and how do you form connections between the artists you curate without being overly didactic? Now, I know you could write a book on that first question, what you look for in an artist's work, but give us the short version.
Okay, sorry, there's noise, but I'm going to try to speak as loud as possible. I think for me, I first look at intention. What is it that you're to express through the practice? What is it that we can learn as viewers from what it is that you're sharing? I'm looking for a unique kind of vernacular that you're constructing through your work. So I think with Gisela, for example, it wasn't just about the portrait that she was creating. It was like the inclusion of these mixed media objects that were actually personal objects from the actual subjects. I'm looking at work ethic because I think the choice to be an artist is a very difficult one. And I think when you choose this as a vocation and as a calling, I'm trying to assess your ability to work through the ups and downs of what it is to be an artist. So it's perspective, it's work ethic, it's something that you hope is unique, and then also hoping that it's resonant within the zeitgeist.
Oh, well, that's a really great answer. Well, I have so many questions for you, Gisela, but some of them we've covered because one question is about the found objects in your pictures, but actually you explained these are not found objects. These are objects that your sitters, your subjects consigned to you, gave to you. Is that right?
Yeah, that it's a mix. So it's really beautiful. A lot of the things are, sometimes I'll just find hoop earrings like outside on the ground and I'll take them home. And giving a life to an object that was worn and kind of honoring the life that it had before is something I'm really interested in. But one thing I'd love to share is just that my past subjects will drop off new jewelry to me for new subjects. So that kind of act of solidarity in, like, again, gift giving is so beautiful, such a beautiful thing that has happened through this work.
That's very nice. And another question is about the use of nature in your work. The question is this: your work has a lot of nature in it. It seems nearly inspired by the rainforest somehow. And is that a big part of your work? So I guess that resonates with what you've been talking about going to Guam and experiencing that. But I guess that you were probably putting a lot of nature there even before your trip.
Yeah, I think it's funny to look at the pre-Guam and the post-Guam work because I was really making up all of these these plants, and I was going to botanical gardens, and I was just taking photos of anything that I felt attracted to, and collaging them and putting them together and creating these almost surreal, just completely made up landscapes. And I think about even like Rousseau's work that was all houseplants. And it was almost this longing that I was expressing through the work of wanting to be somewhere and not being able to get there, and like wanting to understand my work. I think it's kind of hard as an artist to not be reflected in, like, of course I'm painting other people, but like in some ways, like I'm still present in the work because I create it. So, and the jungle, I think thinking about the jungle is just it's a sacred place. Like when you're tomorrow, you're supposed to ask for permission from the ancestors before you enter the jungle. So it's also just like, it feels like a very magical space to me. So to put my subjects in that kind of magical realm, because I do think they are all quite magic to me. They're amazing. So it's just an honor thing.
Well, I love that sense of it almost being a fantasy landscape, but one that's very, very real to you. Larry, I guess that resonates with you as well in a lot of the work that you see from people who've been displaced around the world and who are working out multiple identities and multiple geopolitical realities for themselves.
Yeah, and I think Gisela pointed it out. I think a lot of communities, indigenous communities, their reverence for the land is something. I mean, even being here in Mexico and just kind of looking at how there's a respect, there's an engagement, there's a celebration, which, like, for me is fascinating. But I think one thing that you pointed out, Gisela, that's important is also the connection to the ancestors. And I think honoring that, and then how do you learn from that, and then how does that serve as like a catalyst to not only push you spiritually, personally, but then also creatively. And for me, that was one of the things I gravitated to when I first saw her work was, you know, her always situating the subject in this kind of very kind of robust, luscious landscape, even if it may be interior, um, and creating, these dreamscapes of healing, these dreamscapes of possibility. I think for me is what's been particularly exciting to learn, not only about Gisela's work but other artists who represent indigenous communities.
So here's another question, a good one. Actually, I was going to ask you this myself about pandemic and lockdown and our inability to kind of be together with other people, which must be particularly urgent and difficult for a portraitist. So how did you, let's see what the question actually is. Has the way you approached portraiture changed with the pandemic, with the in-person contact and intimacy becoming so rare? Did it change your work? Did it change the way you approached your subjects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really had to retransform my process for this past year, and it has been difficult. I really miss being in person and sitting in person with somebody, because I think it's just a different type of connection than you can get when you're sitting with somebody else's energy and you can feel them with you. But to answer the question, it's looked like me doing them over Zoom, and it's almost like this barrier that it's different. It's a different process, but it's also been fruitful in ways where sometimes we've just done it as screenshots over Zoom, or they can take their own reference photos, and it requires more communication because we are checking in online back and forth. So it's a different kind of relationship. I think accessibility is really important to me, and I try to be as accessible as possible to my communities. And what that ended up looking like was I have an open call on my website that anybody can submit their story to paint. And that's been really successful over the year, to the point where like it's almost overwhelmed me how many of these stories are coming in, and people are coming to this web page on my website that's literally just a box, and like dumping their experiences there. And I think that makes me excited about transforming more online spaces to create healing spaces online. I think we also see that in the way people are going to therapy now. It's virtual. So it's just and I think as we are slowly being able to, and of course it's a privilege that I can be vaccinated and meet with people in person now, but I think the online stuff is going to stick around. I think it's a different way of communicating, but there's a lot of new possibilities in that, as there's less physical barriers of like I can talk to anybody around the world and work with them and be accessible on a global scale. And of course there's complications to that as well, but it's exciting.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you both how you feel about the. I mean, obviously, we're talking about this online viewing room called Portals, and it's not the first that Art Basel has done, and I'm sure it won't be the last, because I think this is a model that's here to stay. But what do you think, Larry? Do you think this model is going to persist even after we're allowed to kind of have art fairs in person? What are the advantages and disadvantages for you?
Well, I think the disadvantage is obviously there's nothing that can replace, engaging with an artwork physically. Um, but I think the advantages are that we're able to touch more people and connect with more people in a meaningful way. Not everybody has, the privilege of traveling to Switzerland or Miami to physically be part. But I look at the online viewing room, moving forward, it's just going to be a complement of the IRL experience. One, because I think it allows galleries that maybe may not have the resources to physically be part of affairs, they'll be part of an experience. And I think the curation of this portals, I think, is an inflection point that hopefully becomes part of future OVR experiences, where curators are invited to bring a point of view, bring their community as well and their network to kind of expand the conversation. So I'm excited for what the future holds. I look at it as it's going to be a hybrid experience. So we're going to have the IRL experience, but I think we're going to be able to have conversations like this, where you're in London, Gisela's in Detroit, I'm in Mexico, but still be able to have some semblance of intimacy. It doesn't replace being in the same room, but I think it still offers space to be shared, to learn, to be in conversation, and hopefully grow.
That's for sure. We get to meet each other, which is great. So, Gisela, so we've talked about how you feel about actually making your work when you have to do it at a distance. But how about when people are coming to your work and finding it and buying it, and they're interested in it, they want to own a piece of your work, and they are seeing it maybe only online? How does that feel for an artist? How does that feel for you?
It's a challenge. I think the fact that a painting is a marketable object that's being sold is weird to me, because there's so much more than that. There's so much weight within the work that I'm doing, and I really produce them with the intention of them creating change, and also just making sure I see painting as history, I see art as history, and to make sure that the people I love and care about and the stories that I think are important are heard and seen and remembered. is what it's all about to me. So when they do get placed in places where they are going to be accessible, whether that be in a museum collection, etc., like that's ultimately the goal for me, is for this work to be seen again and again and again, and for it to stay around. So when I think about where they're going in the world, it's really my intention and hope is that they continue to instill change wherever they move, and that anybody who does get to interact with this work, it's planting seeds. And in a lot of ways, it's interesting because the people who are buying the work aren't people who would have necessarily ever interacted with the person in the painting. So to make those connections and almost like create that conversation between, or not even conversation, but an opportunity for somebody's voice to be heard in a place that it wasn't going to be ever experienced, is, I really think about the action within the painting and what a painting can do, what a piece of art can do beyond it being a sellable piece. Because I'm concerned about the real action that it creates and the way it's going to make sure that people are remembered. That's what I'm really focused on.
Well, that's a really wonderful message, and I think it's a great place to stop. I'm afraid that we're out of time. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you both so much for your generosity in sharing your stories, sharing your wisdom, sharing your insights. I know that everybody's really enjoyed it. Well, I certainly have. So I'm hoping everybody else has too, and I'm pretty sure they have. So thank you to all of you out there for joining us, and particularly to those of you who submitted comments and questions, because there were some really great questions there. And thanks again to Gisela and to Larry. And we hope you have the opportunity to explore Gisela's work in depth when OVR Portals opens later this week. It's open on Thursday. You can find it very easily online at artbasel.com. And then you can appreciate as well the full extent of Larry's amazing work with his colleagues in everything that he's put together in this really great viewing room. It's going to be a fantastic experience. So thank you both. Thank you, everybody out there. And I look forward to seeing you all again for our next conversation. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Bye.